Well, hello, everybody. Owen Sound Poet Laureate for 2019-2021, Richard Sitoski here with part two of our look at spoken word. If part one was my attempt to differentiate page from stage poetry, part two is just going to be a very, very quick overview of some of the highlights in the development of contemporary North American spoken word. So don't look for this to be a major history or anything like that. I can only provide a few key points along the way. Contemporary North American spoken word is very much part of the worldwide tradition of oral culture. Celtic bards, Nordic skalds, ancient Greek aioi, the Balkan guslarri, First Nation storytellers, the Hakwati of the Arab world. I mean, the list of different representative genres is endless. Until the Renaissance, which gave us the printing press, which gave us a plethora of books, which gave us individual silent reading, all poems were sung and were communal. And even after the Renaissance, people still read aloud to friends and family as a form of entertainment. Just think of Victorian parlors. The first epic singers to be studied in depth at the beginning of the last century, in the first half of the last century, by Milman Parry and Albert Lord, were the Serbo-Croatian guslarri. And we're going to take a look at that in a second. And through studying them, Parry and Lord determined that there were two main styles of composition which are interwoven: the oral improvised and the memorized. The memorized is based on transmitting from bard to apprentice, huge poems, several thousand lines long, multiple hours of work, all to be kept in the memory. And the oral improvised refers to a type of composition in which things are made up on the spot, like freestyle rap. And of course, the two play off one another because you're not going to get a full-fledged multi-thousand line epic unless you've composed it pretty much out of whole cloth in your head. So the first of these traditions we're going to be looking at is the Serbo-Croatian guslarri. Not that this is directly connected to North American spoken word, but this gives you an example of what oral culture was like, perhaps as far back as ancient Greece. The guslar, which is that instrument that the chap is playing, that's that bowed instrument, only has a few notes in its range, which means that the singer is going to adopt kind of like a sing-song pattern over the droning of the strings. And of course, this is going to go on for hours, which may seem rather tedious to us, but remember, you're here for the words and not necessarily the music. They're just a bit of a counterpoint. So you got to think of the Homeric epics as sounding a bit more like that than in the way that we're sometimes presented with them, which is as recited, like through speech. Now there is an oral cultural line which is in direct lineage for the North American spoken word tradition, and that's the tradition of the Griot. These are West African singers who praise people, who celebrate events, who celebrate and commemorate cultural and traditions. They're the repository of society's collected and collective wisdom. They serve as guardians and perpetuators of communal culture. And they even serve as advisors. And I made a huge boo-boo right there. I actually used the past tense, which is a colossal error because it's still a very dynamic cultural tradition at work today in Western Africa. So the griot, and the chap on the right is playing a kora, which is the traditional gourd instrument of the griot in Mali. So let's listen to that. And needless to say, this was a tradition that was brought over with slavery. And I'd be remiss at this point if I didn't mention another stream that led to the development of spoken word, and that's the great tradition of African-American oratory. If you've ever read Frederick Douglass's speeches, you can have an amazing idea of how these things were actually delivered, and they're gorgeous. If you listen to James Baldwin, look up some YouTube videos of James Baldwin speaking. It's absolutely mesmerizing. Fannie Lou Hamer, likewise. I mean, if Martin Luther King's speeches aren't poetry, I don't know what is. Another stream that led to the development of North American spoken word is a folk tradition called the talking blues, and this is a lot of fun. This is kind of like country picking or bluegrass picking with a spoken narrative over the top of it, and these things are usually quite humorous. It was popularized by Woody Guthrie. It was developed by a chap named Chris Bouchelon, and well, I think you're gonna like this.
So I went on down the street and I got another job in a department store. One day a lady came in and I asked her what could I do for her, and she said, "I'd like to see your underwear, young man." I told her, "You'll have to excuse me this time. I don't wear any, it's too hot." The boss spied me there too. Oh, I'm hard looked, ain't no doubt of that.
Now, moving on a little later into the century, into the 20s and further into the 20s and into the 30s and beyond, we have something amazing that took place in the United States, in New York City, which was the Harlem Renaissance, which was an explosion of Black culture, visual arts, poetry, music, everything. And during this moment, it created a consciousness and an identity that have been with us ever since. And Langston Hughes was perhaps the most prominent of the poets during the Harlem Renaissance. And he was very much influenced by the cadences and the meters and jazz and blues. And not just that, but also the structure, the 12-bar structure of the songs. And so what he does is he takes that and he adds to it a social consciousness and a political awareness that wasn't present before. This recording isn't very, very clear, so I hope you might have to turn your volume up for this, but check this out.
Far into the night, room that soon, the stars went out, so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed, while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock, or a man that's dead.
And we're going to see this political and social commentary strain get a lot more powerful as the century goes on, to culminate in the 1970s, and that'll be in another video. So I thank you for following it thus far, and here are some references that I've got to the videos that I provided. So I'd like to once again thank David Medill, CFP of BMO Nesbitt Burns, and former library CEO Andrew Armitage for their generous support of the Poet Laureate program, and the Poet Laureate Advisory Committee and the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library. I'd like to acknowledge that this video was produced on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi Nations. I give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. So thanks a lot, and see you for the next video.